Hello and welcome to this special broadcast with WION. My name is Mohammed Saleh. Now, China is facing one of the strongest storms that it has witnessed in years. Typhoon Doksuri has brought the Asian superpower virtually to its knees as it is battling record rainfall in Beijing and also in the northern parts of the country. The situation is said to be so dire in the second most populous nation in the world that the weather service officials have in fact released a statement on Tuesday saying that the Chinese capital has received the heaviest rainfall in over 140 years, that is since the inception of record keeping. But how severe is the downpour really? Now, the amount of rainfall since Saturday has in fact breached many local weather records. Between Saturday and Wednesday, a reservoir in Beijing's Changping district in fact logged a rainfall that read 744.8 millimeters, which roughly is about 29.3 inches, exceeding the previous record of over 609 millimeters that had been set way back in 1891. The persistent downpour has now prompted the Beijing officials to use flood storage reservoirs for the very first time since its establishment in 25 years ago. And this has been done to divert the flood waters. The torrential rains up until Wednesday had claimed the lives of at least about 20 people, while 27 others were reported to be missing. And according to the rescue officials, more than 52,000 people have been evacuated and about 1.2 million people in the Hebei province have been taken to safety. In the Fangshan district, nearly about 60,000 places of residence have suffered a power outage. But it seems as though China's climate issues do not end here. Multiple regions of the country are in fact reeling under serious flooding. Authorities have announced a number of typhoons are likely to make their landfall in China or will influence its weather systems across the nation. An approaching typhoon called Kanun, the sixth one to hit China this year, has set off some big waves on coastal areas in eastern Zhejiang province of the country. Now, the typhoon has also generated some massive waves as well. And to help us understand as to why China is experiencing floods of this scale and also what role has climate change played in this pretty devastating floods that China has experienced, we're being joined by our guest Erik Solheim, who's a former Minister of Climate and the Environment of Norway and also a former United Nations Environment Executive Director, and he's also been the Undersecretary General of the United Nations, and he's joining us live on this broadcast. Now, Mr. Solheim, what we're witnessing unfold in China at this moment is catastrophic. These are floods that are said to be the worst that have been witnessed in 140 years. Is it climate change that is bringing about these floods, or is this a regular natural phenomena that we're witnessing?
I think it's a mixture of the two. I mean, obviously, we have the El Niño phenomenon, which is a normal phenomenon happening in the Pacific, which may influence the storms in China. But on top of that, we have climate change, and this is exactly what researchers have warned against throughout the last decade or two. Extreme weather, extreme flooding, extreme droughts. And China has had a substantial part of that. I mean, this year there is flooding. Last year there was droughts in Sichuan province in the inner China. And the year before that, there was again flooding in Henan province, which is about a bit south of the place which is now mostly hit. I mean, the main thrust of these storms seems to be in the Hebei province, it's just south of which is including Beijing and the area south of Beijing, but it's also hitting other parts of China. So yes, indeed, in all likelihood, this is become exacerbated by climate change.
Now, Mr. Solheim, for a lot of people, who are watching this broadcast, they'd be thinking about this concept of climate change. It's essentially the increased presence of carbon dioxide, which traps the heat waves within the atmosphere, which makes the overall temperature of the Earth to go up. It results in the melting of the ice caps. But how does that phenomena result in certain areas around the globe? For instance, this time around China, experiencing such heavy rainfall. How does global warming, bring about flooding in certain areas?
The theory which has been most persuasive from the science community is that those areas which are dry tend to be drier, areas which are wet tend to be wetter, and we get more extreme weather events like this. Of course, the good news in the midst of this is that probably no nation on the planet is better prepared for floods than China. I mean, the Chinese civilization started along the Yellow River and the Yangtze River. So flood control is kind of in the DNA of the Chinese people. China has a very strong government which will put in place every possible means to help people. And they have a strong sense of communal feeling that people will help each other. So China is much better prepared than many other parts of the world. But even in such a well-prepared nation like China, this is a very, very severe issue. And of course, with maybe long-term economic pains added to the immediate effect on people.
I think that's an important issue there. And also, Mr. Solheim, you know, the general perception, or at least the talk around climate change had been that climate change is going to affect the poorest nations of the world the very worst. Examples had been given of, you know, the kind of havoc climate change has caused, let's say, in Madagascar or in Pakistan. But what we are witnessing this year is something pretty stark in terms of the contrasts that are made. For instance, Europe is said to be heating up faster than pretty much any other continent around the world. And Europe is experiencing heat waves and forest fires, unlike what we've not witnessed in many decades. And here we have the case of China that is witnessing floods that it has not experienced in over a century. So would it be right to say that irrespective of where any individual is, climate change is going to impact them pretty badly? Even the richer nations are not going to be immune to the impact of climate change.
No, absolutely. That's a very important perspective. No place on the planet is safe from climate change. No individual, even the richest, the most powerful, are completely safe. This year we had extreme heat in Arizona and some southwestern part of the United States. We have heat waves in Italy and Greece and southern Europe with extreme fires. And we have this flooding in China, which is a well-prepared nation. So it's hitting everyone. But still, of course, you're right. The poorest nations in the world with the least resources, the weakest states, are those most vulnerable to extreme weather. However, there are some shining positive examples also. Bangladesh is a relatively poor nation, but is one of the nations in the world which has taken the strongest means to prepare itself for extreme weather. And a cyclone or a massive storm hitting Bangladesh today would have much less deadly impact than a deadly storm, say, 20 or 30 years ago, thanks to good preparations from the government and the people of Bangladesh.
I think that's an important point that you made. And my last question to you, Mr. Solheim, is this. You know, it all boils down to finding the political will in nations around the world for them to come together and pull in the right direction to address this burning issue of climate change. And because these richer nations, these wealthier nations also have a much bigger carbon footprint, do you think now they'll be more compelled to, in fact, come together and to form policies which can address climate change?
I mean, we must fight for a just world. I mean, there is no justice in finger-pointing to developing nations. Look, North American, US and Canadian emissions per capita up to this point are 25 to 30 times the emissions of India, and even more if you compare to Africa. So no one should blame China or India or any developing nation for climate change. It's the responsibility of the rich nations. But the good news is, of course, everyone is acting. Also leaders in less developed nations like Bangladesh is taking strong measures. And of course, China, being a very well-functioning, very well-developed nation, are very, very heavily acting on climate. And President Xi Jinping on China is one of the global leaders speaking the most about the environment of any global leader. So yes, indeed, developing nations are taking action, but no one should blame them. The blame for climate change rests with North America and Europe and a few others.
Absolutely, indeed, Mr. Erik Solheim. Thank you very much indeed for joining us in WION and giving us your perspective on this issue.
Thank you.